Hello everybody. This is Stacey speaking. Please give me a smiley face or say hello in the chat window if you can hear me right now. Cool, I'm seeing lots of smiley faces. So you might have noticed that my name isn't Ron. Sadly, Ron is down for the count at the last minute. He's ill, and so I stepped in because we didn't want to cancel on you guys at the very last minute. So here I am, and here you are. We're going to do some sentence correction tonight. I'm going to share with you guys some new things that we are developing right now and that are going to go into our next series of books, our next sentence correction book. And then I've pulled out some questions that people were asking in the forums. People submitted some questions on sentence correction from a bunch of GMAT problems, and I've also pulled some OG problems for us to test out. So without further ado, let's talk about the process for sentence correction. When a sentence correction question first pops up on the screen, what do you do? What's the very first thing that you do? Tell me in the chat window. Read, that's a good one. Where do you start reading? Joseph, have you read some of my stuff before? So interestingly, in the process that I have up for you on the screen here, read is the second step, not the first step. The first step is what we call take a first glance. And this is something that we can actually do on any question type. And there are specific things that we're looking for, depending on the question type, to get an idea of what we should be thinking about or see if we can get an early clue about what the problem's about. So I'll show you an example of what that means and how we do it in a second. And then we get to the second step, and that's actually to go ahead and read the sentence right up there at the top of the screen. And you'll notice that this specifically calls out reading for meaning. Have you guys been hearing that in the last year or two they've been increasing the emphasis on meaning in sentence correction? It used to really just be mostly about grammar. They used to have a ton of idioms. They've been starting to downgrade the frequency of idioms a little bit. And they've been starting to pay more attention to meaning. Because really, grammar is just in service of making sure that we've got clear sentences that actually make sense to everybody who is reading the sentence. That's what good grammar is really about in the end. So we're going to take a look at some of that tonight because it turns out a number of the grammar areas that we study, they really, when you mess them up, they really have to do with messing up the meaning. So we're going to see how that plays out. Step 3 is find a starting point. And this is a little bit annoying on sentence correction compared to the other question types. The other question types typically have more clear starting points than sentence correction. Sentence correction, there's usually multiple different ways that you could start the problem depending on what you notice. And so you have to decide where you're actually going to start and what you're actually going to start with. So you're going to find some kind of difference or some kind of issue that you think is going on in the problem or in the answer choices. And you're going to ask yourself a really basic question. So I see a difference in the answers, for example. And do I know what to do with that? Because sometimes I don't. Sometimes they even will give us differences in the answers that don't matter. They're called red herrings. So they'll show a difference that both options are fine. And they're just trying to get me to waste time and be distracted. So I figure out whether I can tackle it. If I can, I'm going to go ahead and tackle it and use that to eliminate some answer choices. If I can't, then I'm just going to ignore it, and I'm going to go look for a different starting point. After I do find something that I can tackle and I eliminate some choices, then I look and see, am I done? Now, there's two possible things going on at this stage. Am I done? Maybe I'm down to one answer, which is awesome. I'm going to pick it and keep going. It might also be the case that I'm stuck. Maybe I've already dealt with everything, noticed everything, noticed all the differences in the problem, but I don't know how to deal with any more of them. And maybe I still have 2 or 3 answer choices left. Either way, if I don't really have anything else new to look at, I'm just going to pick and move on. If, however, I have other things that I haven't examined yet, I'm going to go right back up to step 3, and I'm going to loop around until I either have a single answer, or I get stuck, or I think I'm spending too much time, and then I'm going to move on. So that's the overall process for sentence correction. Most of this or a lot of this you're probably already doing. But we're gonna dive into some of these strategies a little bit today and figure out how to make them even better. Okay, so for the first glance, I'm going to put a problem up on the screen. You guys are going to try it. How many of you, give me a smiley face if you have participated in these sessions before, you're familiar with this whole system that we use here. And give me a frowny face or just a no in the chat window or something like that if you haven't. This is your first time with us. All right, I do have some first timers, so let me just give you a quick tool check. You see the chat window down here. You can talk to me at any time in the chat window, tell me what's going on. If you look up here, so there's a whole list of people's names here, right? And then right above that and right below your own name, you see some buttons. There's a button with a smiley face on it. There's a button with a person and a clock. There's a hand. And then there's a button that has an A on it. And so what I'm going to ask you to do right now is scroll your mouse over the button with the A on it. And pick any one of those letters. Pick your favorite letter, A, B, C, D, E. If you had to guess on a question and you just, we're going to pick your favorite letter, which letter would that be? For me, I have no idea why, but my favorite letter is B. That's what I always pick if I have to. So just go ahead and do that to show me that you know where that button is. That's what we're going to be using as we answer questions tonight. So I have about 2/3 of you have given me an answer so far. And just let me know if you're not sure where to look. It's to the left of my pointer here. There's a button over there with an A on it. And if you scroll your mouse over it, it will show you A, B, C, D, E options. Go ahead and select one. And that will show me what answer you picked. All right, and the reason I'm pointing that button out is because I'm about to give you a problem. When we work on problems tonight, I want you to use that button to answer. So I don't want you to put the answer that you get down in the chat window. And that's because nobody else wants to know what you got before they're done working on the problem. It's not a collective test. We don't get to ask our friends. It would be nice if we could, but we don't get to do that on the GMAT. So use those buttons. That way I'll be the only one who can see what answer you pick. Nobody else can see it. Okay, you ready? I'm going to clear all those answers. And go ahead. Okay, so the first glance takes should take about 2 to 3 seconds. So I gave you guys about 2 to 3 seconds there. What can you tell me about this problem? Most of you are probably thinking what Sarah's thinking, which is, I don't know. You shouldn't see anything now, watch me, I took it off. So the first glance is something that you should be able to do in 2 to 3 seconds, and if you're doing it right, and I take away the question, you should be able to tell me something. So there's the issue. All right. So here's how you need to train yourself. So let me talk to you about how the first glance works. I'm not going to show it to you again right now, Rashmi, but you'll have more chances to practice that tonight, don't you worry. Okay, so here's the thing. It pops up on the screen. The question pops up on the screen. And it's huge. There's tons of text, right? So what do you look at first if you're just supposed to take a glance at the thing? So there are a couple of things that you want to notice. First of all, just get a sense of how big of a question we're dealing with here. So is it really long? Is the underline really long? Or the answer choice is really long? That's going to give you a sense both of how long or complicated this particular sentence correction might be. And the longer the underline, the greater the chance that that question is going to be testing what we call the big 4 topics. And the big 4 topics are sentence structure, meaning, modifiers, and parallelism. So if you see a very long underline, you'll already be thinking about those issues before you go in. The other thing that you want to do is look for where that underline starts. And some of you, or maybe all of you already know, that wherever they choose to start the underline, there's always going to be at least one difference in the answer choices. So guaranteed a difference at the beginning of the answer choices. So you want to glance there, just because you know there's one difference there, and that difference might be something that you know how to handle. Jonathan's got it. Jonathan did the first glance. That's awesome. So take a look at this. Oops, sorry. So I grayed out the text that I would want you to ignore in that first second or two when you're doing the first glance. You're not starting to read over here. You're not knowing that it's about species or dolphins or whatever. You're going to just sort of, okay, it's not a super long underline. It's just sort of medium, and you're going to look at the word right before the underline and right where the underline starts and just kind of think, okay, what's going on here? And then you're going to glance down the beginning of the answer choices and see what the difference is. And Jonathan spotted this, include versus includes. Now you guys tell me, what is that? What's the difference between using the word include and the word includes? Deepika, are you talking about the 4 steps in the process, or are you asking me about the 4 things for long underlines? And yes, indeed, include versus includes is singular versus plural. Now, 2 things can deal with singular versus plural. It could be subject-verb agreement, or it could be pronouns. Can you tell in this case which one of those it is without reading anything else but that right there, include versus includes? It's got to be subject-verb agreement in this case because include is a verb. If it were a noun switching back and forth between between singular and plural, you would know it's either subject-verb agreement or it's pronouns, but you wouldn't know which until you went to read the sentence. Okay, Deepika, for long underlines, which is actually not this one, but we'll see some of these later on tonight. For long underlines, it's, here, you know what, I'm going to type it in the chat window. So sentence structure, the meaning of the sentence, modifiers, or parallelism, excuse me, are the foremost common, are very commonly tested when the underline is long. So you want to be thinking about this. Okay, so we do the first glance and we go, okay, include, interesting. That's a verb that's switching back and forth, which means I definitely need to find the subject so that I can know whether I need a singular verb or a plural verb. And so now you have a point of view, you have something to look for. You're not just randomly starting to read the sentence, the 32 species and wondering what's going on. Right? You know you're actually looking for the subject. So all right, so then you're going to go up and you're going to start reading the sentence up here. And you're going to be paying attention to the meaning, the overall idea of the sentence, and you're also going to be thinking about, so what's the subject that goes with this verb? So what did you guys come up with? What's the subject that goes with that verb? And I'll give you a second to read it now. Go ahead. All right, so the subject is some noun that most of the time comes before the verb, except for in very rare sentence structures. And I've got a bunch of people telling me that it's species. And tell me, how do you know that it's species and not some of the other nouns that I see over here, like dolphin family or whales? How do you know that it's species? Love it. Rahul's all over that. We've got modifiers going on here. All right, so that make up the dolphin family. That's a modifier that's describing the species. Good, good, good. And then are is another verb. It's interesting. Are, and then this part closely related. It's just additional information going with that part of the verb. Check it out. They've got the word and here. What does that do? What does that signal? And is something called a conjunction, and it signals parallelism. Good. And so in this case, what needs to be made parallel to what? What's the and making parallel? Tricky. I'm getting lots of opinions on this guy. So the sentence structure that we have here is a complex sentence structure. They're giving us a subject, and then a verb, and then an and then another verb. With some modifiers tossed in the middle to make it more fun, right? But we've got subject, species, are something, and include something else. And so these two verbs, they both have to go with the subject. And so indeed, that subject is species. And we know it's plural because why? There are actually two clues in this one that it needs to be plural. This first verb is plural, so the are, and 32 is more than one, right? So that guy said species is plural. And the species is an annoying word because You can have one species too. It's the same word, whether it's singular or plural. But they gave us some clues in there that this guy is definitely plural, which means we want this one over here to be plural. Okay. So what we've just done here is step 3, which is find that starting point. So we went into it going, okay, includes, where's the subject? I'm reading it, I figure out the subject. Oh, this is the subject. And then if you know how to handle that, which you guys do, then you go ahead and tackle it. You go, okay, so which is it? Should it be include or should it be includes? Indeed. So species include is plural. And so we are going to get to step 4 now, which is to eliminate any incorrect answers, which means answer choices D and E are gone. Now A, B, and C, they all say include, so they're all correct on that issue. And that means that we now need to jump back to step 3 to find a new starting point. So we're down to 3 answers, and we got to do it all over again. This is one of the other annoying things about sentence correction. You will typically need to find at least 2 starting points and sometimes more on any single sentence correction question, which is, again, why the process is so important. It's also important down here to make sure that you're doing this. Give me I was going to say smiley face, but maybe a frowny face would be more appropriate. Give me a frowny face if you have ever sat there staring at a difference in the answer choices or an issue or whatever, just staring at it because you don't know what to do with it. But you can see that there's a difference, but you just don't know what to do with it. I need to give a frowny face too because I've absolutely done that. And it's a really bad habit. It's something that we have to train out of ourselves. If you know how to handle it, you handle it. If you don't know how to handle it, you move on. If that means in the end that you can't get down to a single answer choice, fine. Just pick randomly from whatever you have left and move on. Okay. All right, so give me a new starting point on this one. What's something else that we can tackle between answers A, B, and C? All right, let's see. We've got this difference over here. We've got which can grow versus growing. Okay. Oh, and I've got some other people suggesting other things. Let me just highlight these on here. We've also got and is, and nothing, and being. All right. I'm just scrolling up to see if there's anything else. And in this case, there is one more. Can grow to be, growing as big as, or growing up to. All right. So as I said, there's multiple things going on here. And the one saving grace of sentence correction is that there's usually more going on than you actually need to deal with. So you don't typically have to deal with every single difference that they give you. You choose selectively, opportunistically, what you're good at, what you know, and that's what you tackle. So let's see, a bunch of people told me about the which can grow versus growing one first. So let's tackle that one. Which one do you think it should be and why? Okay, I've got lots of votes for which over growing. And Anthony's telling me which refers to the killer whale. Okay, so let's see. This whole piece of information about growing to be 30 feet long and is famous for its aggressive hunting pods. So Anthony, what you're saying is we want to talk about the killer whale, and so the which option does that. What about the growing option? How come that one doesn't refer to the killer whale? Yeah, good. So comma ing modifier, see the comma right there? A comma ing modifier refers to the subject and verb of the main clause, and possibly the object as well, but mainly the subject and verb of the main sentence to which it's attached. So that main sentence would be the species are closely related and include the animal. And it's not all 32 species that are very long, it really is just the killer whale. So actually, if you know those two things, then you can get rid of, if you know the includes issue and you know the which can grow versus growing issue, you can get rid of all 4 wrong answers and pick the correct answer in this one, which is answer A. When there is no comma P, so when you have an ing word without a comma separating it out, then that one is a noun modifier, and it really is just referring to the noun. So you could say, for example, I'll type in the chat window, the dog running down the street is brown. And that running right there, see how there's no comma? It's referring to the dog. No problem, Antoine. You probably wonder why I'm not Ron. Ron's sick, unfortunately, and so I stepped in at the last minute so that we wouldn't have to cancel on you guys. Didn't want to leave you hanging on study night. Okay, so that's our process for sentence correction. Now, I want to use this process tonight. We're going to practice this multiple times to practice the steps, first of all. Also, to take a look at how to handle really hard sentences, really long underlines with a lot going on, a lot changing in the answer choices. How do we actually pick these guys apart and figure out what's going on? Okay. Let's see. Sarah, if it's after a comma, it is not functioning in this case. No, it's not functioning as a gerund. A gerund is another word for a noun. In this case, it's functioning as you don't need to know the grammar terms. If you see comma ing, it's a modifier that's referring to the whole sentence. Just think about it that way. And you could also do a running dog, yes. Good. Okay. So any questions on that so far? I'm just going to take us back over to our screen that summarized our process. If you like that process, if that works for you, feel free to go ahead and take a screenshot of it so that you can save it for later. Any questions on that? If you're ready, if you want to try, ready to go on to the next bit of our lesson here, give me a smiley face. And if you want to talk about anything, just let me know. All right, let's do it. All right, I'm going to take us ahead. So I want to talk, before we do our next question, I just want to talk a little bit about sentence structure. Thank you for me. Ron and I work closely together. He's not going to lose his job. He's awesome. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about sentence structure and how anybody makes sentences more complex. Because in order to handle the most complex sentences on the GMAT, you have to know how to take those complex sentences and break them down into what we call the core sentence, which is really the subject and the verb, the basic part of the sentence. So I'm going to keep making the sentence more complicated. And each time I make it more complicated, what I want you guys to tell me in the chat window is the new text, the new words that I add to the sentence, what are they doing there? What are they talking about? Okay, so here's the first one. So you'll always see this in green. Tell me what it's doing there. It is an adjective, and what's its purpose? Yeah, so adjectives describe nouns in the sentence. In this case, it's describing the dog, exactly. What about this one? It is a modifier, and specifically it is a prepositional phrase. And what's it doing here? So this is a modifier. What's it modifying? Good. So in this case, unlike the first one, this guy is describing how, or not how, but yeah, I guess you could say how the dog is barking or what the dog is barking at. It's barking at its own reflection. So you can see that we have different kinds of modifiers can be referring to different kinds of things in the sentence. Okay, what about this one? Yet another modifier. So I'm going to give you guys a hint. All the ones I'm going to show you, they're all modifiers. So don't tell me any more modifiers. Tell me something more specific than that. All right. So this time, we're back to describing the dog again. So this is another noun modifier. If someone asked, should this have commas? Should we have commas here? Should that my uncle owns be set off by commas? Tell me whether you think yes or no, and tell me why. I always want to know why. All right, so there are these things and modifiers that are called essential versus non-essential. Essential means it's essential to the meaning of the sentence. If you didn't have this information, you might not understand the meaning of the sentence. Non-essential means, hey, by the way, I just wanted to give you some extra information. So when you use the word that is used for essential modifiers. So maybe there are two scruffy dogs sitting in front of us right now, and I want to indicate to you, oh, the scruffy dog, the one that my uncle owns, not the other one, that one. That scruffy dog, he barks at his own reflection. So in that case, it would be essential to the meaning of the sentence, because otherwise you wouldn't know which scruffy dog I was talking about. If there was only one dog sitting in front of us, and I just wanted to tell you, oh, by the way, my uncle happens to own this dog, I would write the sentence as, the scruffy dog, comma, which my uncle owns, by the way, comma, barks at its own reflection. Okay, so both of those, the which or the that, they're both introducing noun modifiers, in this case talking about the dog. All right, good. What about this guy? All right, good. So this guy is telling us when it barks. It barks. When does it bark? Oh, when it passes a mirror. All right, good. Getting more complicated. And noticing that sometimes things don't have to be. So for earlier examples, our modifiers were right next to the things that they were modifying. As sentences get more complex, you can't put everything right next to the noun or the verb that it's talking about. Things have to be placed, it gets a little fuzzier, it gets a little trickier, and that's where the GMAT is going to start to mess with us. That's where they're really going to start to try to get us to miss something or have something placed in the wrong way so that it's actually referring to the wrong thing, but maybe we don't notice because the sentence is getting so complex. All right, what about this last one? Now I have a question for you. Is this new one, is it its own sentence or is it still a modifier? Good, it is still a modifier. You can't have a sentence that says, although blah, 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 period. Can't do that. Good, it's a subordinate clause. And subordinate clauses are typically referring to the entire main clause. So clause is a fancy word for a sentence, by the way, guys. It just means something that has a subject and a verb. Subordinate clauses are typically referring to the entire main clause. It's not just that the dog should know better by now, although that's what this is saying with the it right here. It really should know better by now that it shouldn't bark at its own reflection. So it's referring to this whole thing that's going on here. So you can see how we started from a simple sentence with just a subject and a verb and not much else going on to a fairly complex sentence. And even this sentence is not as long and convoluted as some of the sentences that they give us on the test, right? So start to just look at sentences like this and start to try to strip them down. Notice that dog bark still stays as the core of the sentence all the way up to this last example. Start to go back and look at problems you've already done, easier problems in the OG, and try to strip the sentences down and find the basic core of the sentence. Remember that it can get more complicated than this as well. So think back to our dolphins sentence, where we had 32 species, and then we had two verbs, not just one, right? Are something and include something else. So they can get pretty complicated. We're going to see some examples of that tonight, and then I want you to just keep looking for that as you continue to study. Okay, the next question I have up for you is one that somebody requested in the forms that you guys submit before these sessions happen. So I'll give you about a minute and a half to try the question. And I'm just going to repeat this because we've had some people join since we started. When you answer the question, I want you to use the buttons that are up on the upper part of the screen here, so right underneath your name and above the names of everybody else in class. There's a button up there with an A on it. And if you scroll over it, you'll see A, B, C, D, E. That's where you're going to answer. Okay, please don't answer in the chat window. All right, just go ahead and try this problem. This one's from GMAT Prep. I gave you guys about a minute and a half on this one. It's a little bit longer than we need to average on the test. Sentence correction should be about a minute 15 to a minute 20 on average, but this is a longer, harder question. So it's okay to spend a little bit more time on it. All right, first glance. Who used it? who actually remembered to glance at this thing and see what was going on first? Did you pick anything up? Now this one's harder. This one's not like the last one where there was a really obvious difference right at the beginning. So did you pick anything up in your first glance? Yeah, so, all right. Yeah, so take a look up here and we see include, and because of course the word the isn't much of a word, you'd probably look at brain, right? So you'd see include the brain. Now the word include means I'm about to give you like an example of something. So you don't know exactly what's going on yet with the example because you haven't read the sentence yet, but okay. And then you look and you go, huh, interesting. So this example that they're going to give me, something includes the brain or mice. Oh wait. Or mice's brains, or the brain, or back to brain again. And so now you're thinking, okay, well, do I want to include the mice, or do I want to include the brains of the mice? And actually, down here, you might not notice this on the initial, that initial glance, but technically this is the noun. You'd have to go as far as brain growth. So you've got the brain versus mice versus growth going on down here. Although, again, you might not notice that on the first glance, because you don't really know what's going on with the sentence yet. So something's going on with that, and then that might also make me think, hey, is something going on either with meaning or with parallelism or something like that in terms of what noun we have to use here? All right, I'm going to think about that as I go read the sentence. Okay, so then you go read the original sentence. And what did you guys think about that original sentence? Was it okay? Was there something you didn't like about it? What did you think? All right, so I've got something talking about parallelism, not liking A, B, or C, too many things going on. Tell me this. A lot of times people will tell me on this problem that they don't like the original sentence. It sounds weird. But when I say why, they're like, I don't know, it just sounds weird. Was that you? Did you think that when you were reading it? Did you not like it, but you weren't entirely sure exactly why? Wasn't an obvious thing like, oh, subject verb is wrong, or something like that? Yeah? Okay. So it's okay to think that and to not immediately know what's going on. It's totally fine. Go back and look at that original sentence again. And I want you to tell me the part where, like Anthony's just telling me, tell me the part where you started to think, I'm not so sure about this. All right, so a lot of people are talking about the brain growing part. Sounds weird. All right. The or just sounded weird. All right. Growing in mice sounded weird. All right, all right. So what are they talking about here? So tell me, don't give me the words of the sentence, right? Like don't write the sentence for me. Just tell me your own words. What's the sentence doing? Okay. Okay, so some examples of this end thing. include. Oh, right, because I remember thinking about what does the include actually mean here. So some examples include, and then how many examples do they give me? And then they're going to give me 2 examples. Okay. Oh, I see. So that was the or bit, right, that somebody didn't like over here, or neurons, blah, blah, blah. So examples include the brain doing something, or maybe one of the other options, and then neurons increasing. Okay. And someone else also, this scrolled by, but someone else also didn't like this when part over here. So, okay. Here's what's going on here. I'm not going to tell you exactly what the answer is. I'm going to give you a sample sentence that's different but has the same structure as this thing. And I'm going to ask you to see if you can figure out what's going on. Or sorry, that doesn't have the same structure as this one, that has a correct structure but uses a similar structure to this one. So here's my sentence. I eat mangoes on the beach when hungry, because I spend all my time on the beach. So, on the beach is a modifier, and prepositional phrases usually have to be pretty close to the thing that they're talking about, especially if they're talking about a noun. When hungry, yeah. So what's that talking about? Oh, it's when I'm hungry. It's not when the beach is hungry, right? So technically, this sentence is totally correct. You can say this. Most people don't. Most people would say when I'm hungry. But you can say that. And even if I changed it a little bit to say, I eat mangoes with my sister when hungry. This would mean when we're both hungry, or still all the way back to when I'm hungry. So take a look at the sentence, the original sentence that we've got up here. Examples include the brain growing in mice when placed in a stimulating environment. The when placed is not talking about the mice. It's right next to the mice. Logically, it should be talking about the mice. We should be placing the mice in the stimulating environment. But that's not what the structure is saying. So what did you do here to make this more clear? You guys offered me something right here, right, to make this more clear. What were you actually doing there? You're picking up the subject, right, and reusing it. So you're using the same subject. I ate mangoes on the beach when I am hungry. I ate mangoes with my sister when I am hungry. Do that in this sentence. What noun is going to go right here? And you need to pick that noun up from earlier in the sentence, and it needs to be the subject of the sentence. What's the subject of the sentence? Mice is not the subject of the sentence. In mice, prepositional phrase, not the subject. Of neurogenesis, not the subject, of. The brain, no verb after that. Yeah, it's all the way back here. It's examples. Examples include the brain growing when the examples are placed in a stimulating environment. That doesn't make any sense. Or, no, you could say it's the brain, all right? Let's say it's the brain. The examples include the brain growing, blah, 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 when the brain is placed in a stimulating environment. Like they're taking the brain out of the mouse and putting it in a stimulating, ew. Let's hope that's not what they're doing. The production, none of these make sense, right? The only thing that makes sense is place the mice in the stimulating environment, but you can't do that. The when has to be referring back to the subject. So that's why it sounds funny, but you're not sure why. It sounds okay when you're seeing it up here. You know what it's supposed to be when I'm hungry, but the sentence is so complicated, it's hard to even see that. So answer choice A is no good because The thing that's being placed here is not actually the mice. It's not actually the mice. Okay, so we can cross off answer choice A, and then as soon as you find any error, you do want to check the other answer choices to see whether any others repeat that same error. So go look through B, C, D, and E and tell me if there are any others that have the same error. All right, so in D, they also just do this when placed thing. They don't put something here. And then we're like, wait, is it the brain growth? Is it the examples? I don't know. Okay, so D is no good. Now, how did they change this in B and C? They still have the when. How did they change this up? Okay, so they actually did put a pronoun in now, right? So now we can go, oh, hey, pronoun. Cool, well, maybe that's the next place we should look at. Let's go check out, because right when we see pronouns, we should go check and make sure that they're referring to the right thing. So, what are these pronouns referring to? So it's a little bit different in B and C because the structure is a little different. So in B, we've got mice whose brains grow when they are placed in a stimulating environment. I would call that ambiguous because my first thought would be that they're placing the brains in the stimulating environment. And again, I'm feeling really sorry for these mice because I hope that's not what's going on. And then I go, oh, wait, they probably mean the mice. But then the fact that I'm even thinking both of those things means that's ambiguous. It's bad. And then let's go down and see when they change it to mice's brains. Does that fix the ambiguity from B, or what does that do? No? Okay, why not? It is indeed, Olivia's right. It is now referring to the brains. It can't refer to the mice. So mice's apostrophe S has turned into an adjective. This is called a possessive noun when you have the apostrophe S. And a possessive noun functioning as an adjective in the sense it's not as a noun. Now you can, there's one circumstance in which you can actually use a pronoun to refer to an adjective. As long as it's in this form, the possessive noun form. And that is when the pronoun itself is also in possessive form. So you can refer to a possessive noun if you've got a pronoun that's in possessive form. This pronoun, what form is it in? Is it in possessive form? It's not. What would the equivalent possessive form be? So the word they is not. It would be their. Good. So you've got they, them, and their are the three forms of this third person plural pronoun. They is what's called a subject pronoun. You can see it's being used as a subject right here. They are placed, subject and verb. Right? Them is an object. I went to the movies with them. And there is a possessive. So since mice's is in this possessive noun form, you could use their to refer to it, but that's not in the sentence. They've got they. And so that's no good. And we can cross off C. And that leaves us with E, and I sure hope it's right. So let's go check E. So what did E do? It took when out entirely, and it changed it to that are placed. So is that okay? Tell me why. Why is it okay to say that are placed instead of when? Good, okay, so we did want to talk about the mice all along, right? It was just that the earlier ones were problematic because they weren't clearly referring to the mice. So the word that, placed right after a noun, it's referring to that noun in mice, but not just in any mice, specifically in mice that are placed in a stimulating environment. Okay, yay. So that gets us down to the correct answer, which is indeed E on this one. Now, there are other things going on in this one that we could have used to narrow down answer choices. So again, you don't necessarily need to use everything. You use what you see, and you use what you think you know how to handle. Rashmi, you're lagging, unfortunately. So you'll catch up with us again in a second. I do want to point out one reason why people might eliminate E. And this is something that happens on hard questions. It's something I want you guys to start looking for. On hard questions, they are going to, on verbal questions, they're going to try to make the right answer look a little bit wrong or off or weird in some way to give people a reason to not pick it, to cross it off. Okay, so one of the things that we didn't use on this one was parallelism. The sentence does require parallelism. It's got this word or right here. And so what are the two things that need to be parallel in this sentence with or? NL, there's not one split that everyone should start with. It really is whatever you happen to see first. So if you don't see that one first, you use something else first. You use whatever you see first. Okay, so in this case, the two things that are being made parallel are growth and increase. Right? Okay, so people will look at that a lot of times and think that doesn't look parallel. Like growth and increase seem like different things. And it's true that they don't look all that close, but they're both nouns. They are structurally parallel. Yeah, they need to be structurally parallel because of this or, and they are in fact. So examples include growth, brain growth in mice, and those examples include an increase in neurons. And even though it looks a little funny and this guy has an and in front, but this guy doesn't have an article in front and whatever, they're both nouns describing a particular action, a growth and an increase. Those are perfectly parallel. There's nothing wrong there. It just looks a little funny if you're trying to pick things apart and second guess yourself, which is a potential trap on this test, obviously. Let's see. In D, okay, so the brain growth and the increase. So notice how they did this here, trying to make it look like this is more parallel to try to get you to pick D, right? Because you have the and the. So it seems like it's better somehow, basically. The issue with saying the, this is really nitpicky. I wouldn't necessarily use this in the test, especially if you're a non-native speaker. This might be tough. When you say the versus a, you are referring to one specific thing, like the cat, that cat right there, the one that I was just talking about, versus a cat, any cat in general. So when you talk about the brain growth or the increase, you're either doing that, you're referring to a specific brain growth, like maybe also, you know, the mice have like tumors in their heads or something like that, or you could use the when you're referring to something that you referenced earlier in the sentence. If you had already mentioned brain growth once and wanted to mention it again, then you could use this the second time to say, I want to talk about that same brain growth or that same increase that I talked about before. But this sentence doesn't do that. And so in this case, the is too specific. It wouldn't be good for this. Okay. All right, good. Good questions on that one, guys. So big takeaway on this one. Sometimes when you do the first glance, I know first glance is new for a lot of you. Sometimes when you do the first glance, it's going to be like it was on our dolphins question. It's going to be really clear and awesome. Includes, sweet. Now I need to just go find the subject. So that's awesome because it gives you a really nice intro into the sentence, right? A really nice way to get into the sentence. Sometimes it's going to be more complex, like this one. And sometimes it's really not going to, you're going to look at it and be like, I have no idea. That didn't help me at all. So it's not always going to work this first glance. But if you start to do it, and if you start to train yourself to do it, and you also just, after you're done with problems, go back and spend a little bit of time thinking about that before you move on from that problem, you'll start to get better at picking up, they're switching which noun they're talking about. Usually, that's going to have something to do either with modifiers or parallelism or something like that, because it's what are we specifically referring to, what are we specifically saying here. Modifiers and parallelism both overall have a lot to do with the meaning of the sentence. So you know something like that is going on, even if you don't know exactly what to do with this or what to look for to resolve the issue. So it gives you a sense of what's going on before you even go up here and read the sentence. Okay. Let's see. At the end of D, let me just take a look here. Okay. So the increase in canaries' neurons when they learn new songs. Yeah, exactly. So in this one, that's another problem. It can't refer to, they is again a subject pronoun. So it can't refer to the possessive noun canaries. So it's saying that the neurons learn new songs. And I suppose technically, maybe that's what's happening in our brains. I don't know. But that's just not how we speak, right? That doesn't make sense. It's the canaries learning the new songs, not their neurons. Good, so that's another reason. Very, very good. Oh, yep, and C does that as well. So all kinds of good things in this one. So just note, who was asking me, NL, like what do we start with? So there's multiple things that you might notice. Another clue, by the way, when pronoun issues are going on is when they sometimes use a pronoun, sometimes don't. So you can see when you're comparing these answer choices, when placed, when they are placed, and you'd look and think, all right, well, let me check the pronoun. And if you notice this issue with Mice's brains here, then that will be top of mind to help you notice the they issue with the canaries down here as well. And someone's asking about the topic today, sentence correction. We're doing sentence correction broadly. We just happen to be talking about pronouns right now. Just talking about complicated sentence correction. All right. Any other questions on this guy before I toss up your next question? Yeah, pronouns in general can be confusing, I agree. Yeah, I like what Bruno said. Yeah, this was a good question. If whoever it was that requested this one is here, let us know. This was a nice one to pick out. All right, here is your next problem. This one's from OG13. Go ahead and try it. All right, what have you guys got for me in this one? We've got a big debate on this one. Answers B and D are neck and neck, almost the same number of votes. And we've also got some other ones chosen as well. All right, now this guy, remember earlier when I said sometimes something's gonna pop up on the screen and you are gonna see that the underline is really long, the answers are really long. So as soon as you see this, again, start thinking big four, structure, meaning, modifiers, parallelism. There's probably something going on with one or more of those when the underline is as long as this guy. This guy also has some other interesting things that you would notice on a first glance, like these dashes here. What do those guys do? Why do we use those in a sentence? Providing extra information, maybe an example, or explaining something. Good, okay. And how do they function? So is it a modifier sitting in there? Is it a sentence itself? Could it be anything? Can be pretty close to anything, but usually it's actually going to be a complete clause, usually. And it should be providing extra information about something in the sentence that it has mentioned before it actually gets to that hyphen or that dash. Now there's two different ways they can do this. They can do it as you see it on screen with something that's completely enclosed off, so they have two hyphens, or they could actually do this where it's just one hyphen, in which case the modifying thing or the extra piece of information or explanation is the last thing in the sentence. But because they have two in this one, what they're saying is the stuff between the hyphens, that's like a self-contained piece of information. It doesn't need to fit into the overall sentence structure, so it's its own structure. But once you get after this hyphen over here and start again, this part over here has to fit structurally with the rest of the part that was before the hyphen. So you could, if you took this out entirely, the rest of it would just have to be a correct, complete sentence. Okay. Not necessarily, Ramit. It doesn't have to be the case that what's before has to be a complete clause. But if you take this out, here, I'm going to highlight this all in gray for a second. So this gray stuff that I'm doing here, it's sort of its own thing. And if you were to completely strip that out, take it out, everything else that's left has to be one sentence that flows. All the parts are correct and go with each other and whatever. You know, the normal things you would look for in a sentence. So that's a good clue when you notice those hyphens, you start with the double hyphens, that you're going to be looking to put this part and this part that are separated. You're going to be looking to look at them together. And that's, again, an even bigger clue that maybe something's going on with either structure or meaning, because they're separating these parts, so they're trying to get us to maybe miss something. Okay, so talk to me about the sentence. You read the original sentence. Nobody has picked A, so nobody liked it. What did you not like about it? There is definitely something weird going on here. So there's a couple of different ways that you could talk about it. Some people are saying there's a verb missing. Some people are saying they're repeating heirloom tomatoes. So take a look here. So we have although appearing less appetizing, blah, blah, blah. So this is an opening modifier. Then we get to this comma here. And they say heirloom tomatoes. And so you're expecting, okay, here's the core sentence. It's starting up. Heirloom tomatoes. So that would be the subject. I'm not sure yet. I'm going to keep reading. Comma, grown from seeds. Okay, so that's just a modifier. Grown from seeds saved during the previous year. And then I'm going to ignore this. Ignore the hyphen for right now. Heirlooms are more flavorful. Huh. So in my brain, I really wish they would let us do this on screen. But no. So in my brain, I'm kind of going, okay, I'm ignoring this because I know what it's doing. It's an opening modifier. I'm looking for the core of the sentence. This is another modifier. Ignore this. So that's weird. I have heirloom tomatoes, heirlooms are. So I have this, like, two subjects that are actually the same subject. It's the same word. And there's nothing in between them. Like, if I am going to have two subjects, I would have to say, you know, Anthony and Bruno. Or I would have to say tomatoes and corn. Or something like that, right? I can't just say tomatoes, corn are more flavorful. You can't just run those two together. So that's why they tossed all this stuff in, all these modifiers, and even this hyphenated bit right here, because they were trying to hide this. They were trying to disguise the fact that it's got two subjects just running into each other. And in fact, it's just the same subject twice. All right, so we can cross off answer choice A for repeating that subject there. Any others that do the same thing? All right, let's see. So answer C, again, has this opening modifier, again, goes into the grown thing, and still has the heirloom tomatoes hanging out there where they shouldn't be. All right, good. C is gone. And then let's see, we've got E too. All right, let's go take a look at E, what's going on here. They move things around in E. Heirloom tomatoes is up front. Grown from seeds is still a modifier. Although they appear less appetizing, is still a modifier. They just moved stuff around. But still, heirloom tomatoes is hanging out there by itself. A double subject. All right, sweet. So we got rid of A, C, and E. Whew, all right, what about between B and D? Yeah, so what you'd want to do here is you'd go, okay, so do B and D fix the problem, right? You're examining these guys to see whether they repeat the problem. They don't. They do something different. So what is it that they do differently? So in B, we've got, although the heirloom tomatoes, so they pull the heirloom tomatoes into that although thing, appear less appetizing, blah, blah, blah. And over here, they do, let's say they've grown from seeds, and D is still a modifier. Heirloom tomatoes appear less appetizing. So structurally, B and D are pretty similar, but B includes this word although, and D doesn't. And in this case, that turns into a huge thing. As Kiwi's saying, first of all, there's no contrast there. And that contrast isn't just to indicate a contrast, right? Although that is part of the meaning, certainly, of the contrast. When you start something with although, what do we call this earlier? It's not the core sentence itself. It is a modifier. It's that subordinate clause, right? So it seems like a complete sentence. Heirloom tomatoes appear less appetizing. But with this thing right here, this although, it's now subordinate to the main sentence. Heirlooms are more flavorful. So you can do that in a sentence. You can say, although tomatoes appear less appetizing, they are more flavorful. Totally true, by the way. I love heirloom tomatoes. So yummy. And we're coming up on the good season for them. Anyway, okay, so down here when they don't do that, they just say heirloom tomatoes appear less appetizing. Heirlooms are more flavorful. The only thing that's different here is that although, or here I'll make it exactly the same, so I'll make this just they. But, what's wrong with D? It's only one word different, but what's wrong with D? It is a run-on. All right, so you can't say, for example, I like tennis, he likes soccer, with just a comma sitting there. Can't do that in a sentence. If you're going to connect two complete sentences, there are different ways to do that, but this is not one of them. You have to stick a conjunction in between, like, I like tennis, but he likes soccer. Or as Anna's suggesting, we have to use a semicolon. I like tennis, semicolon, he likes soccer. So you can't just stick a comma in there and go straight into another sentence. And that's what answer choice B is doing. Answer choice B, on the other hand, takes this opening thing and makes it a subordinate clause. And so now that's okay. Although I like tennis, he really likes soccer. That would be okay. So D is also incorrect for giving us a run-on sentence. And the correct answer on this one is B. And I want to point something out to you on this one. All four of the wrong answers, we could get rid of them because they messed up the fundamental sentence structure. And you'd never make those mistakes if they just gave you the straight out sentence, right? Would you ever look at a sentence and go, heirloom tomatoes, heirlooms are more flavorful, and think that was okay? If you just saw it like that, you'd be like, no, that's wrong. You can't do that. If you just saw a simple sentence like this, also you'd be like, no, you can't do that. That's not okay. But they give us so many convoluted things, and notice this thing, this extra hyphenated comment here is entirely here just to get you to mess up and not notice the sentence structure issues that cross that hyphen. So start looking for this kind of stuff, and this is why I wanted to focus today on talking about how they make sentences complex and how we can start to strip them down and try to find the basic sentence structure, because they love this stuff. They've been increasing the incidence of this stuff. I've been seeing more of it get published as they've been publishing new books over the last few years. They're talking about it more when I talk to them at conferences. They are really getting into sentence structure and meaning. So this is stuff that definitely you want to start paying attention to if you haven't done already. Okay. Let's see, in B, so maybe a reason to get rid of B, right, that they're trying to get you to cross off the correct answer. So look what Bruno said, that the there over here made him think like, oh, maybe that's too far away, maybe the there is ambiguous or it's a problem. Yeah, okay, so they're trying to give you a reason to doubt it. And for pronouns, what I'll say is, I will often, if I see pronouns, I often won't use them first. Because there are times, we've all had these times, right, when you look at an OG question and you think, oh, that's ambiguous, I'm going to cross it off. And then you read the explanation and they're like, no, that's fine. And you're thinking, really? But why? And this other one that I studied last week, it was ambiguous. So it's so annoying. So pronouns are kind of fuzzy. So I don't start with pronouns, even if I see them. There are a couple rules that I know, but I don't like pronouns. I'll go for things like sentence structure, subject-verb agreement, things that I know are hard and fast rules. You have to have a subject and a verb. You can't have two subjects run into each other. You can't have two sentences run into each other, you know. And those things I know are harder rules, and so I'm more confident when I'm using them. All right. Okay. All right. Good stuff on this one, guys. I got another little mini quiz set up for you. I'm going to give you a sentence, a nice long convoluted sentence that I wrote a couple months ago, and I want you to figure out what's wrong with it. Do me a favor, don't start typing in the chat window yet. I'm going to give everybody about 30, 45 seconds to do this. And then when I ask you to type in the chat, do it. All right, did you guys know that there was something called a northern blue-tongued skink? I always find interesting things. I go onto Wikipedia, and there's a button that says, just like, surprise me. And that's how I get little topics for sentences. It's fun. You should try it sometime. All right, so what's going on here? Results should be results. Oh, Q saying faces should be face. Modifying reptiles results should be results. All right, faces. It is subject-verb agreement. It's absolutely subject-verb agreement. And I was also not very nice because I said find the mistake. But there's actually more than one mistake. Yep, there are two mistakes here. All right, let's break this thing down. So you start reading the threat, let's see, of dehydration is a prepositional phrase talking about the threat, describing the threat. That desert reptiles face. Good. So what I did here was I nested a bunch of modifiers. And I tossed in, are you getting a theme here? I tossed in something in the middle so that you would get distracted, just like that last one did with the two hyphen thingy. So I tossed in this example in the middle so that you'd get distracted and maybe miss that desert reptiles should go with face. They should both be plural. And then I still haven't gotten to the verb of the sentence. All this stuff that I've blocked off in the brackets, these are all modifiers. So I've still got the subject, the threat, sitting out here without a verb to go with it. And that verb comes in right after this verb right here. So wow, is that annoying? I've got two verbs right next to each other. One's going with desert reptiles and one's going with threat. And of course, one's singular and one's plural, because it wouldn't be much of a test if they were both plural or both singular, right? So then I mix these two up. This should actually be face, and this should be results. The threat results from the dry and hot environment. What is that threat? Oh, it's a threat of dehydration. Who suffers from the threat of dehydration? Oh, it's the desert reptiles that face this. Yeah, exactly, exactly. So here's what's going on here. That desert reptile's face is the modifier. The threat results from is the core sentence. So this is still the incorrect version at the top of the screen. The correct version is down here. The threat results from the dry and hot environment. That threat of dehydration is something that desert reptiles face. So they're going to nest stuff like this, and they're going to toss in this extra stuff just to toss in some words, just to separate some stuff out more, to make it harder to see what's going on. And this is, again, what becomes so important, to try to learn how to break that sentence down into the modifiers versus the core, the subject and the verb, or subjects and verbs if there are multiple, so that you can put the right pieces together. Super, super tricky. Okay, any questions on that one before I put up what will probably be our last question of the evening? Any questions on that stuff? All right. I know which question I want to do as our last one. Yes, I want to do that one. Okay, try this guy. This is another OG13 question. This is a toughie. We use this actually in hiring and training. I've got, I'll give you guys another 15, 20 seconds. If you're lost though, pick something. Pretend it's the real test, pick something and move on. Alternatively, if you're agonizing back and forth between two choices, never do that on verbal. Once you get down to two choices, compare those two choices directly, and then pick something and move on. All right, people are changing answers. We've got every answer chosen at least once. All right, a lot going on this one. Okay, so to start on this one, the first glance isn't going to give you something specific to hone in on, but again, we've got a really long underline. If you glance at the beginning, you can see it's very different. And so that's almost certainly there's something going on with, again, the big four, the structure, meaning, modifiers, or parallelism. That's very, very common when they're just changing the sentence around that much. But that's what's going on. Okay, so you read the original sentence. What did you guys think about that one? By the way, right now, answers A and C are tied for the lead. There are also multiple votes for B and E, and nobody any longer has picked D. So that's where we're at. So what did you guys think about the original sentence up here? Do you think it was okay? Did you look at it and think, I don't know? Did you see something that you wanted to tackle that you thought was wrong? All right, Anthony wanted to look at the originally developed. All right, so what's going on here? So let's find the structure. Let's find this core sentence again, right? Let's figure out what's going on here. So this part, when you have something that's this long and this much changing in the answer choices, try to break it up by groups of words or chunks of words, and so the commas are nice places to look. So let's start with what we're going to call the first chunk here, which is originally developed for detecting air pollutants. Now this chunk, what's it doing in the sentence? Is it the subject of the sentence, subject and verb? Is it a modifier? What's going on? It is a modifier, okay. All right, originally developed. It's not a noun there, so it's not the subject. Okay, so it's a modifier, so we have to think about, where is this and what's it modifying and what's going on. Our next chunk is a technique called proton-induced X-ray emission. What's this piece doing? All right, so we've got a subject combined with another modifier here. So, or at least we haven't finished reading it yet, but we suspect anyway. We've got a subject going on here. So we've got this noun, a technique, this modifier called, etc., which is referring to it. And then we go, oh, okay, so if we've got this noun after this comma here, then the modifier in red over here should refer to this noun, does it? Yeah, it does. All right. Yep, you could say the technique was originally developed for a certain thing, a certain purpose. Okay. All right, now we've got another chunk, another nice long chunk here. We'll do this guy in green all the way to this comma. What's this guy doing in the sentence? We've got another modifier. This guy is a bit more obvious if you've been studying modifiers because it starts with the word which is a modifier signal. Okay. All right, and that's referring to this thing over here, the emission, or is it referring to technique? What you're talking about? So some people are saying the emission, some people are saying the technique. Does it matter? Is it fine either way? Or is there a problem, or what? All right, I've got some people telling me one way, some people telling me the other way. We'll leave that for now. Then we get, oh, is. Hey, that's a verb. Is that our verb? Is that our main verb, or is it something else? All right, so the technique is finding uses. And of course, if you really just sat there, you wouldn't totally have a complete sentence because you wouldn't know what you're talking about. But then we've just got this short little list, at least they're nice to us at the end of the sentence. Now that the underline is over, we've just got this short little list that's finding uses. Well, I'll just extend the purple. That's good enough. It's finding uses in 3 domains: medicine, archaeology, and criminology. Okay, fine. All right. So now I've got my little rainbow going on up there. And someone mentioned, a couple of people were talking about, you know, this which, it should be referring to technique, but it looks like it's referring to omission, so we've maybe got a problem there. It's something we might have to look at. So go and examine that in the other answers and see how it changes things. Go see what your options are. If, on the other hand, you thought, yeah, it's referring to omission, it's fine, so you didn't have a starting point on this one, you would go to the next answer choice and just read it and see if that gives you a starting point instead. So basically, in general, sometimes you're going to read your original sentence and you're going to be like, I don't know, it seems okay to me. And then just go to the next one and read that one and see what the differences are, and that will give you an idea of what to start thinking about. Okay, so let's see. So this part, let me change my color back to green here since this is what we're doing. So in B, it changes that the which can quickly analyze, etc. Having the ability to analyze, it changes to that in B. In C, I'm back to which can quickly analyze, which has the ability to analyze. And wow, E really changes some things up. I'll come back to E in a minute. Okay. My first question for you is, so when you have this line of an underline and you have modifier, you know there might be something going on with modifiers and structure. When they're moving modifiers around or changing the structure, they may change where the modifier is placed, so what it's referring to. They may even change the structure of the modifier so that it's no longer a modifier and it's actually part of the core of the sentence. Okay? So those are the kinds of things you want to be looking out for when you go and see, hey, what's going on with these modifiers in the different answer choices. So in A, we already decided it's a modifier. C also has the which. D also has the which. In B, is it still a modifier? Has it become part of the core of the sentence? What's going on? So it's got the comma ing, and a comma ing is also a modifier. So not part of the core of the sentence. So they've changed the form of the modifier, but a comma ing, I'm going to actually extend our little highlighter here to include that comma. Still a modifier, so still has to follow modifier rules generally of having to refer to something in the sentence, and it's got to make sense and all of that. All right. So originally developed for detecting air pollutants, comma, having the ability to analyze. What's the having the ability to analyze referring to? Logically, I agree, it should refer to technique. There's a problem here. Pete's right. There's a problem here. When you have two modifiers like this running, like one right after the other, and they both refer all the way down here logically, let me get my colors here. So here's our technique, right? And I want them all to refer to technique. But now I'm like waiting, I'm looking for originally developed for detecting air pollutants, and I'm looking at the ability to elements. Wait, what was developed? What's going on here? And then I get having the ability, comma having, I'm looking for it to refer back to what was before it, but it doesn't. So now I'm not sure whether the red is supposed to refer to the green or the green is supposed to refer to the red or what's going on here. And that doesn't get cleared up until I get all the way over here to technique, and I would still have to go back and like read it again to figure out what's going on. So that's too ambiguously structured. That's no good. We're going to cross off B. Oh, and N says, okay, so this is why E is wrong too. Let's go take a look at what's going on with E. So in E, remember I said before, wow, this one really changes things, and I'm going to come back to this. So here we have has the ability to analyze. So it doesn't have the which anymore. It doesn't say having. What did they do here in E? How did they change the structure? Ted's got it. So we've got a technique. Sorry, and actually, hold on a second. They changed it. So we've got a technique, and then we've got that, which originally developed for detecting air pollutants, and has, I'm going to circle these. These are the two that are parallel. Has the ability to analyze the chemical elements in almost any substance quickly and without destroying the substance. Wow. Called proton-induced X-ray emission is finding uses. So what's going on there? What can we tackle there? Is there anything we can attack? So yeah, there are two ands. You can't have two ands in sentences. So there's some, but we might want to check parallelism, for example. So we've got was and has, those guys are okay. Let's see, the ability to analyze the elements quickly and without destroying the substance. Straight parallelism, that stuff's all okay. Might sound a little awkward with the and, so you might not like that part of it. And Pete's asking, should we have a that here? It'd be nice to have the that was originally developed and that has the ability, just to make it clear. That would be a nice thing to have. Chumley was also talking about that. Oh, look at what Olivia says. Take a look at what Olivia says. Called proton-induced X-ray emission. What's called proton-induced X-ray emission? In the original sentence, it was technique. In answer choice E, what's called proton-induced X-ray emission? If you only had this sentence, so if you had no idea that the technique was supposed to be called proton-induced X-ray emission, you'd be thinking the substance was called proton-induced X-ray emission. Yeah, that's a problem. All right, so E, oh, no good there. No good. Where do you want to go to next? Now, I want to go back to the which, actually. So we talked about the which before, and is it referring to technique? And a couple of people told me, well, it should be referring to technique, but it's not. It's referring to emission. Look at A and C and D. We don't have choice. It's got emission, comma, which, and all three of those. So we're stuck there. So as soon as that happens, you go, oh, okay, forget that, and just forget about it. A is back in. You will have had a your brain will have already gone, oh, I don't really like A now, because you noticed that. But as soon as you realize, oh, wait, B and E are wrong, and I got the same in all three of these, so I guess it must be okay. So you just forget about it, ignore it. Okay. D has quickly, it's just over here. See what they're doing to us? They're so evil. They're so evil. All right. I'm going to go back to, remember this one where we said called proton-induced X-ray emission looks like it's referring to substance? Check that modifier in the remaining ones. Make sure it's okay in the other ones. So anytime you find anything in one, make sure you go check any remaining answers to see if you can reuse that reason. So what do you think about that one? Check it out. If we look at D, we've got called right after air pollutants. And again, if you didn't know, if you never read this thing up here that told you technique is proton-induced X-ray emission, you would read this and you'd go, wait, so the air pollutants are, or is it the technique? I'm not sure. Because it looks like, so something that says called, you're giving it a name, should pretty much be placed next to whatever is actually called. And this one's not. And guess what? It's the same thing in C. So the only one that puts technique appropriately next to called and doesn't have other errors because B had other errors. The only one that does that is answer choice A. Now here's the thing. If you go read the OG explanation, they will tell you that the which thing here does refer to technique, not omission. Okay, here's what's going on here. A lot of you may have read that noun modifiers must be placed right next to, they must touch the noun that they modify. In fact, our book currently says this. It will not say it in the next thing. It will say most of the time it does, but there are exceptions. So I'm going to show you, I need a new color, let's do yellow. So this sentence, bizarrely enough, contains 3 modifiers that are all trying to refer to the same noun. They're all trying to, right? Originally developed refers to technique. Called, proton, induced refers to technique. Which can quickly analyze refers to technique. 3 different modifiers. So how in the world can you place all 3 modifiers right next to the noun? You can't, right? The noun only has 2 sides. You can put it before, you can put it after, that's it. So there's only 2 places to put modifiers right next to the noun. So in this case, when you have something that's this complex, you can, this is one of the exceptions, you can say, okay, well here's one modifier, here's a second one, here's a third one, and the key here is that essential modifiers trump non-essential modifiers. Remember earlier we were talking about essential versus non-essential? Essential modifiers trump non-essential modifiers. Essential modifiers are things that are not separated out from the noun by commas, and they're things like, for example, the name of the noun. So called proton-induced X-ray emission is an essential modifier. I don't know what you're talking about if you don't tell me, if you just say a technique for what? So this guy gets to go right next to technique, comma which, by definition, is a non-essential modifier. They just always are. So that one, it's okay to go a little bit further away. It's non-essential. Put the essential one first, and then stick the non-essential one in there when you need to. Okay. So there are exceptions to that rule. It's not the case that 100% of the time a noun modifier touches the noun it modifies. It's probably about 95% of the time. There are some exceptions, and this is one of them. Right, emission is not. Technique is. So the which thing is referring to technique. And that's what I'm saying. That rule about it's got to be the noun right before, that's not 100% true. It's like 95% true. But this is an exception to the rule. Okay, I'm just scrolling back up to see whether I missed other questions. Someone's asking about, isn't destroying it confusing? So what they're saying here is it is referring back to substance. So this technique can analyze the elements in a substance without destroying that substance. And that is, it's okay. There isn't anything actually wrong with that. So it is actually okay. Is the comma having, yeah, so the problem with B here is that the comma having appears to be referring up here to the red stuff, except it doesn't make sense because nothing in there has the ability to analyze the chemical elements. Yeah, you've got it. And someone asked up about, so how many instructors or potential instructors actually get through this? So we used to use this in hiring. We would give them the problem ahead of time. So people who were interviewing with us, who wanted to teach for us, we would give them the problem ahead of time, and we would even give them the OG explanation. The OG explanation is not very good, frankly, so we didn't really think it was helping them. And then they had to prepare to teach it, and then we would play a student, and they would have to explain it to us. And so when I played the student, I narrowed it down to A and C, which was exactly what you guys were debating between A and C. And so I would narrow it down, and then I would, inevitably, they would tell me that C was wrong, because, not inevitably, but a lot of people that I dinged, that I didn't let through, would tell me, oh, C is wrong because the which needs to be, it's too far from technique, it needs to be next to technique. And then I would say, but it's not next to it in A, and then they would get flustered and wouldn't know what to do from there because they hadn't actually dug into it far enough. in their preparation. And so that's how we would know whether one of the ways anyway, how we would know whether we wanted to let somebody keep going in the audition process. Olivia is asking, should we always try to put the subject in the middle of several modifiers? No, I wouldn't say that that's always a rule. If you do have multiple modifiers, though, then one of the ways to make the sentence more clear is to put a modifier before and a modifier after if you've got multiple modifiers all trying to refer to the same thing. So that's one of the potential ways that you can structure it. It is also possible, though, as we saw in the second half of this, the yellow and the green, it is possible to have two modifiers follow that are both referring back to this noun right here in certain circumstances. Kiwi, most of the time that's true. 90+% of the time that's true, but not always. And you will see the exceptions on harder questions because, of course, the exceptions are the hard part. Other questions? Good work with this stuff tonight, guys. I'm glad you're here, Anthony. Oh, and good question. So Rahul's asking, what about the with and without destroying the substance? Okay, so over here, what's going on in E, if you go and you read their explanation, they basically call this awkward. And what they're basically saying here is there's like too many modifiers all kind of jammed together between these two brackets that I put right here. And I agree, I do think it's awkward, but I also think that's a judgment call. You know, like how do you know when it gets too awkward? And how do you know when it's not too awkward? You know, it's a judgment call. So I don't love using that. I'd rather use something, again, like a harder rule where I'm like, wait a second, the substance isn't called that. The technique is. So that's a problem right there. But if you're stuck on the test, right, like if you were stuck between A and E, for example, and you looked at E and you were like, wow, that's pretty awkward, and A, I don't love it, but it's not as awkward as E, then, you know, that would be a reason to go with it on the test. And then if it were a practice test, you would go look at it afterwards to try to learn from whatever that issue was. Yeah, I think Ron does look for other sources of things. I had about 30 minutes to prepare the session tonight. So I didn't have a lot of time to put this together. All right, guys. Well, thank you for coming. Great session. You guys did really good work with this stuff. And good luck with your prep. You know, good luck with everything.